Detective Kiji Okafor parked his department Ford near 415 Oak Street at 8 a.m. on March 21st. The spring sun was breaking through the gray clouds over the eastern part of Detroit, illuminating rows of single-story post-war houses. 18 years on the homicide squad had taught him not to rush. The dead weren't going anywhere, and haste could cost him important clues. The McCreary house was unremarkable among its neighbors, a typical 1950s brick structure with a small porch and a neat lawn. Yellow police tape already surrounded the property, and Patrol Officer Rodriguez stood guard at the entrance, glancing nervously at the curious neighbors gathered behind the fence. "What do we have, officer?" Okafor asked, taking a notepad and pen from his inside pocket. "Murder, detective. The victim is Zendaya McCree, 28 years old, African American. The body was discovered by a neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, at 7:30 this morning when she was taking out the trash. The door was ajar. She looked inside and saw blood." "And the suspect?" "Dashan McCurry, 34 years old, the victim's husband. He's inside the house, taken into custody without resistance. Sergeant Miller is with him now." Okafor nodded and headed for the entrance. He was met on the porch by Sergeant Miller, a 20-year veteran whose face remained professionally impassive. "Kiji, prepare yourself for an unpleasant sight," he warned in a low voice. "The woman was beaten very badly. The husband is sitting in the kitchen, covered in blood. He says he killed his wife and doesn't want to discuss anything else." The detective crossed the threshold and immediately smelled the familiar metallic scent of blood, which he had learned to recognize with his first breath over the years. In the small hallway, broken pieces of a ceramic vase lay scattered on the floor, and blood splatters were visible on the wall. The living room was a scene of destruction and violence. The body of a young black woman in a blue nightgown lay on the floor near the sofa. Zendaya McCurry was a beautiful woman. Even death could not completely distort her regular features and slender figure. Her long black hair was scattered across the carpet, creating a strange contrast with the surrounding chaos. The killer used his hands, possibly also some kind of blunt object. Any signs of a struggle? Minimal. It looks like the victim was taken by surprise or didn't put up much of a fight. A broken vase in the hallway and an overturned coffee table, that's all. Okafor carefully examined the room. The furniture had been moved slightly, and the TV was on mute, showing the morning news. A smartphone with a cracked screen lay on the floor near the body, but it was still working. "Where's our suspect?" "In the kitchen. He's been sitting there for over an hour, barely moving." The kitchen was located at the back of the house and had windows overlooking a small backyard. A large man with broad shoulders and muscular arms sat at the table. Dashan McCurry was dressed in jeans and a plaid shirt, both of which were splattered with blood. There were deep abrasions on the knuckles of his right hand and a dark bruise on his left cheek. When the detective appeared, he did not raise his head, continuing to stare blankly at a spot on the table. His posture conveyed the utter devastation and shock of a man who had done something irreversible. "Mr. McCurry, I'm Detective Okafor from the Homicide Division. I need to ask you a few questions." Dashan slowly raised his eyes. There was no fear in them, no attempt to find an excuse, only the emptiness and strange calm of a man who had accepted his fate. "I killed Zendaya," he said in a hoarse, broken voice. "That's all you need to know. I understand, but I still need to find out the circumstances of what happened. Would you like a lawyer to be present during the interview?" "Why would I need a lawyer? I'm not going to deny what I did." Okafor took a tape recorder out of his pocket and placed it on the table between them, after obtaining the suspect's consent to be recorded. March 21st, 8:20 a.m. Detective Kiji Okafor is conducting an interview with suspect Dashan McCready. "Mr. McCready, please tell us what happened last night." Dashan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, as if trying to collect his thoughts. "Yesterday was a normal day. I worked at the auto repair shop until 6 in the evening, as usual. When I got home, Zendaya wasn't there yet. She left a note saying she would be late from work until 9. Was this normal? In the last few months, yes. She often said they had a lot of work, projects, meetings. I didn't suspect anything was wrong." The detective took notes without interrupting the story. "I heated up the dinner she had made in the morning and watched the news. She came home around 9:30. She looked tired and said she wanted to take a shower and go to bed early. How did your evening usually go? We hardly spoke. She seemed distracted, checking her phone all the time. I thought she was just tired after work. We had dinner, she went to take a shower, and I stayed to watch the sports news. Dashan fell silent, his face reflecting the pain he was trying to suppress. And then what happened? Around 11, she said she was going to bed. She kissed me as usual and said goodnight. I watched TV for another half hour, then decided to go to bed too. And? When I went into the bedroom, she was fast asleep, or pretending to be asleep. I lay down next to her, but I couldn't sleep. Something about her behavior bothered me. She had been different lately. Okafor noticed the muscles in the suspect's face tense up. Different in what way? Cold, distant. We used to talk a lot, laugh together. But in the last few months, she was always busy. Work, her phone, anything but me. What happened next? Dashan got up from the table and walked over to the window, looking out at the backyard, where several old apple trees grew. I got up to get a drink of water and noticed her phone was on the kitchen table. She always took it with her to the bedroom, so I'm standing there, looking at this phone, and it suddenly dawned on me. What if I checked it? Did you know the password? Our wedding date, June 7th, 2016. There was bitter irony in Dashan's voice. The phone unlocked on the first try, and then I saw what destroyed my life. The detective continued to write, waiting for him to continue. The last messages were from someone named O. I opened the conversation and realized that my wife was cheating on me. Months of messages, photos, plans for meetings, and then I saw another conversation with A, and it was the same thing. So your wife was having two affairs at the same time? It seems so. Two men who didn't know about each other, and I, like a fool, thought everything was fine. Dashan turned away from the window, and the detective saw a mixture of pain and rage in his eyes. I woke her up. I showed her the phone. I asked who O and A were. At first, she tried to deny everything, saying it was a misunderstanding. Then she confessed. What exactly did she say? That she was seeing two men from work, that she was tired of our boring life and wanted something more, that I could never give her what they could. Dashan's voice grew more tense. And then I hit her, and then again, and again. I couldn't stop. 8 years of marriage, and she played me like a fool. Okafor turned off the recorder and put away his notebook. The preliminary picture of the crime was clear. A typical murder motivated by jealousy and infidelity. The motive was obvious. The suspect did not deny his guilt, and there was physical evidence. Mr. McCready, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Dashan nodded, showing no emotion. He seemed to have already accepted his fate and was just waiting for the formalities to be completed. The time of death had been established approximately. The preliminary circumstances had been clarified, and now the painstaking work of gathering all the evidence and piecing together the full picture of the tragedy that had occurred lay ahead. Detective Okafor returned to the station 2 hours after the first interrogation to conduct a more detailed interview with Dashan McCurry. The suspect was placed in an interrogation room, a small room with mirrored glass, a metal table, and 2 chairs. Dashan sat in the same position as he had in the morning, his head bowed and staring at a single point. In the meantime, his clothes had been taken away for examination, and he was now wearing a standard orange prison uniform. The abrasions on his knuckles had been treated and covered with bandages, but the traces of the violence were still clearly visible. Mr. McCreary, I'd like to talk in more detail about the events of last night, the detective began, turning on the tape recorder. March 21st, 11:30 a.m. Second interrogation of suspect Dashan McCreary. I already told you everything this morning, Dashan said wearily without raising his head. I understand, but I need details. You said you found messages between your wife and 2 men. Tell me more about that. Dashan sighed deeply and leaned back in his chair. When I picked up her phone, the first thing that caught my eye was the number of unread messages. Zendai usually had very few, but there were more than 20 from that evening. Who were the messages from? Mostly from 2 contacts, O and A. I opened the conversation with O first. It said, I miss you, baby. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I hope my husband doesn't suspect anything. And there were many other messages like that. The detective carefully wrote down every word. What did your wife reply? She wrote back that she missed him too, that she hated pretending to be at home, that she dreamed of the day when they could be together openly. In one message she wrote, "Dashan is so boring and predictable, you make me feel alive." Dashan's voice became more tense as he repeated these words. Then I started scrolling through their correspondence. It turned out that their affair had been going on for 8 months. He sent her photos of expensive restaurants they had been to, gifts he had bought her, and she sent him intimate photos. Do you understand who O is? From the correspondence, it became clear that it was her boss, Orleans Chilemwe, the owner of the insurance company where Zendaya worked. He constantly wrote about how they met in his office after work, how they went on business trips together. Dashan stood up and began pacing the small room. But the worst was yet to come. I noticed that there was another active conversation, with A. And when I opened it, I realized that something unimaginable was going on. What exactly? A second affair, parallel to the first. A turned out to be Amari Nkomo, her co-worker, and she was writing to him just as passionately as she was writing to Orleans. The detective looked up from his notebook. So she was dating her boss and a co-worker at the same time? Exactly. Amari wrote to her about his love, about wanting to marry her, and she replied that she loved him too and was ready to do anything for him. At the same time, she wrote exactly the same thing to Orleans. Did they know about each other? Judging by their correspondence, no. Each thought he was the only lover. Zendaya was a master at playing both sides. Dashan stopped at the wall and punched it with his fist. 8 years of marriage. For 8 years, I thought everything was fine. Yes, we weren't rich. Yes, I'm just a mechanic. But I loved her and thought she loved me. How did you feel when you read these messages? At first, shock. Then pain. And then rage. A rage I've never felt before. Imagine finding out that your wife isn't just cheating on you with one man, but is leading a double life with 2 men at once. How long did you read the messages? Probably about an hour. I scrolled through the messages from the last few months. I saw how they planned their meetings while I was at work, how they arranged trips that she passed off as business trips, how they discussed gifts that she then hid from me. Dashan returned to the table and sat down opposite the detective. In one message to Orleans, she wrote, "I can't live with Dashan anymore. He's a good man, but I deserve better." And to Amari, she said, "My husband doesn't understand me, doesn't appreciate me. With you, I feel like a real woman." What happened next? I realized I couldn't read anymore. My hands were shaking with rage. I went into the bedroom where she was sleeping and turned on the light. How did your wife react? She woke up immediately. She saw her phone in my hands and realized something was wrong. She asked, "Dashan, what's going on? Why do you have my phone?" What did you say to her? I showed her the screen with the messages and said, "Tell me about Orleans Chilemwe and Amari Nkomo. Tell me how long you've been making a fool of me." Dashan closed his eyes, remembering the scene. At first, she tried to deny everything. She said it was a misunderstanding, that the messages didn't mean what I thought they meant, that it was just friendly texting with colleagues. But you didn't believe her? How can you believe that when you see intimate photos and love confessions? I started reading her messages out loud, especially the ones where she wrote how boring I was and how she wanted to leave me. What happened then? She realized it was useless to deny it. She sat down on the bed and said, "Okay, Dashan, yes, I'm in a relationship with them. Now what?" Dashan's voice became harsher. Just like that. No apologies, no explanations. Now what? As if we were talking about the weather. And then? I asked her how long it had been going on. She said she'd been with Orleans for 8 months and with Amari for 4. I asked if they knew about each other. She said no, and that it was better that way. Better? Yes, that's the word she used. She said that each of them gave her something. Orleans gives her money, status, and expensive gifts. Amari gives her passion, romance, and plans for the future. And I, according to her, only gave her stability, which wasn't enough for her. The detective continued to take notes, trying not to miss a single detail. How did she explain her behavior? She said she was tired of our life. That at 28, she had a right to happiness and new experiences. That I could never give her the life she wanted. Did she talk about her plans for the future? Yes. It turns out she had already made up her mind. She was planning to leave me within a month, but she couldn't choose between Orleans and Amari. So she was considering both of them as options for a serious relationship? Exactly. Orleans promised to divorce his wife and marry her. He offered her a position as deputy director in his company, and Amari wanted to move with her to another city where he had connections for career advancement. Dason stood up again and walked over to the mirrored glass. You know what hurt me the most? It wasn't that she was cheating on me. It was how calmly she talked about it, as if I were an obstacle that needed to be removed from her path. How did you feel at that moment? Humiliated, hurt, angry? I asked her, what about our 8 years of marriage, our plans, the promises? And she said, Dashan, we got married too young. People change. I've outgrown this relationship. And then you got into a fight? Not right away. I was still trying to figure out if there was any way to fix things. I asked her if she loved me at all. Zendaya paused, then said, You're a good man, Dashan, but the love is gone. I'm sorry. Dashan turned from the mirror to the detective. That's when it hit me. All those months of deception, humiliation, plans to leave me for other men. I couldn't take it anymore, and I hit her. Tell me more about that. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, and I hit her in the face with my hand. Hard. She fell back, but immediately jumped up and started screaming that I was crazy, that she was going to call the police. What happened next? She ran into the living room, and I followed her. She grabbed the phone to call, but I snatched it from her. We started fighting. She was scratching and screaming, and then I completely lost control. So, most of the beating took place in the living room? Yes, that's where I killed her. I beat her with my hands until she stopped moving. Only then did I realize what I had done. Okafor turned off the tape recorder. The picture of that night became clearer. 8 months of cheating with her boss, 4 months of a parallel affair with a colleague, and the fateful discovery that led to tragedy. A wife who calmly confessed to double betrayal and announced her plans to leave, choosing between her 2 lovers, and a husband who couldn't bear such humiliation. Detective Okafor took a short break and returned to the interrogation room 20 minutes later. Dashan McCreary was sitting in the same position, staring at the table. The silence in the room was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of city traffic outside the window. Mr. McCready, I need you to tell me about the last moments of your wife's life in more detail, said the detective, turning on the tape recorder again. March 21st, 1:10 p.m. continuation of the interrogation. Dashan raised his head and looked at the detective with tired eyes. You want to know exactly how I killed Zendaya? I need to understand the exact sequence of events. You said she confessed to cheating on you and planning to leave. What happened after that? Dashan took a deep breath and began his story. After she said she didn't love me anymore, I hit her. But that was only the beginning. She jumped out of bed and started yelling at me. What exactly did she yell? That I was crazy, that I had no right to touch her, that she would file for divorce immediately and take half of everything we had. And then she added that she was glad that everything had finally come out. Dason clenched his fists, remembering the scene. Glad? Do you understand? She was glad that I found out about her betrayal. She said she was tired of pretending to be a loving wife. What happened next? She ran into the living room and I followed her. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table and started dialing. I asked her who she was calling and she said, Orleans, let him know you found out everything and he should come get me. Dashan's voice grew increasingly tense. Can you imagine? She wanted to call her lover to come and take her away from our home while I was standing there. Did you let her make the call? No. I grabbed the phone from her. Then she started scratching me, trying to get it back. She screamed that I had no right to stop her from calling whoever she wanted. What did you say? I yelled at her, asking how she could do this to me. 8 years of marriage, and she treated me like a toy. But do you know what she said to me? The detective shook his head, continuing to write. She said, Dashan, you're a good man, but you're boring. I'm young and beautiful. I deserve a better life. Orleans can give me a house, a car, travel. Amari is young and ambitious. With him, I'll have passion and a career. What can you give me? The life of a mechanic's wife in this shabby house? Dason stood up and began pacing the room. Shabby house. We bought this house together, renovated it ourselves. I thought it was our family home, but to her it was shabby. Continue with the story of the fight. We fought over the phone near the sofa. She was strong, she worked out, but I managed to grab the phone. I threw it on the floor and the screen cracked. What did your wife do? Zendaya went completely crazy. She started screaming that I broke the expensive phone Orleans gave her, that now she's definitely going to file for divorce and take every penny. Dashan stopped at the wall and slammed his palm against it. And then she said the thing that finished me off. You know what, Dashan? I've been sleeping with Orleans in our bed while you're at work for a long time now, and with Amari too. They're both better than you in every way. And then you hit her again? Yes, but this time harder, with my right hand, in the face. Hearing that she was bringing her lovers into our home, into our bed, I couldn't take it. How did your wife react to the blow? She flew against the wall, knocked over a vase on the table, and it broke. But she jumped up immediately and started screaming even louder. She said she would call the police and accuse me of domestic violence. Dason returned to the table but remained standing. And then she added, "You can hit me all you want, but tomorrow I'm leaving with Orleans. He rented us an apartment downtown. And in a month we'll get married as soon as he gets divorced." So she already had specific plans? Apparently, yes. Everything was decided. She was going to tell me she was getting a divorce in a week. She had even consulted a lawyer about dividing our property. How did you feel when you heard that? I was furious. You see, not only had she been cheating on me for 8 months, but she had also planned the whole deception, consulting with lawyers, renting an apartment, making wedding plans with her lover. All of this was happening while I was working and thinking that we had a normal family. Tell me about the murder. Dashan sat down on a chair and covered his face with his hands. After she said she was going to marry Orleans, I was overcome with a rage I had never felt before. I grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her, yelling at her to shut up. And she? She kept saying nasty things. She said I was a loser, that I always had been, that any other man would have achieved more in life long ago, that she was ashamed to introduce me to her friends. Dashan's voice trembled with emotion. And then she said the worst thing. You know, Dashan, I never loved you. I only married you because I was pregnant. And when I lost the baby in the 2nd month, I thought, what's the point of this marriage? But it was too late. The detective looked up from his notebook. This information was new. You didn't know about the pregnancy? No. She hid both the pregnancy and the miscarriage, so it turns out that the only reason we got married was a lie from the start. What happened after she said that? I couldn't control myself anymore. I punched her in the stomach, then again in the face. She fell to the floor but kept screaming. What was she screaming about? That she would ruin me in court. That she would take the house, the car, all our savings. That she would tell everyone what a pathetic loser I was. And that Orleans would help her destroy me financially. Dason stood up and began pacing the room again. You see, even as she lay on the floor, beaten, all she could think about was how to hurt me. There wasn't a shred of remorse, not even an attempt to apologize. Go on. I leaned over her and said, Zendaya, why are you doing this to me? What did I do? And she replied, for existing, for getting in the way of my life. And then you continued beating her? Yes. I sat on top of her and started punching her. In the face, in the chest, in the stomach. She tried to cover herself with her hands, but I was stronger. How long did it last? I don't know exactly. 5 minutes, maybe 10. I beat her until my hands hurt, until she stopped fighting back and screaming. When did you realize she was dead? When I saw she wasn't breathing. Her eyes were open but motionless. I stood up and looked at my hands. They were covered in blood. There was a pool of blood on the floor too. Dashan paused and looked at his hands as if he could see the blood on them again. What did you do then? At first, I just stood there and looked at her. I couldn't believe I had done it. Then I went to the bathroom and washed my hands, but the blood wouldn't wash off completely. Did you try to hide the crime? No. I knew it was useless. I went back to the living room, sat down next to the body and waited. What were you waiting for? I don't know. I just sat there and thought about how my life was over. That 8 years of marriage had led to this nightmare. How long did you stay with the body? Until morning, 7 or 8 hours. I went to the kitchen to get a drink of water a few times, but mostly I sat in the living room. What were you thinking about during that time? about how we met, how I proposed to her, how we planned to have children, a house, a future, and how it was all a lie on her part. Dashin sat back down at the table. You know what's weird? Even after what I did, it still hurt to think about her cheating on me. It was like I didn't kill my wife, but a stranger. Do you regret what you did? I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret that the truth came out. Better this than a life of constant deception. Okafor turned off the tape recorder and closed his notebook. The picture of the crime was complete. Dashin McCreary, in a state of emotional distress, killed his wife after learning of her long-term affair with 2 men and her plans to divorce him for one of her lovers. Mr. McCready, you are officially under arrest on charges of first-degree murder. You will be transferred to a detention center until your trial. Dashin nodded, showing no emotion. He looked like a man who had accepted his fate and was no longer fighting against his circumstances. The next day, March 22nd, Detective Okafor arrived at the station at 8 a.m. to begin a thorough review of Dashin McCurry's statement and gather all the necessary evidence. Although the suspect had admitted his guilt, the procedure required a detailed examination of all the circumstances of the case. Orleans saw her as a young, beautiful woman willing to tie her life to his for financial security. Amari believed he had found his true love, willing to give up everything for him. Dashan thought he was living with a faithful wife who sometimes stayed late at work. None of the 3 knew the truth about how Zendaya had skillfully manipulated them all, choosing the most advantageous course of action for herself. Her plans only fell apart when her husband accidentally found her phone and read her messages with both lovers at the same time. Detective Okafor spent the 3rd day of the investigation gathering the final details and forming a complete picture of the tragedy that had unfolded. On March 23rd at 10 in the morning, he met with Orleans Chilembwe again, this time in the formal setting of the police station to take a detailed statement. Orleans looked depressed and aged over the past 2 days. The news that Zendaya was seeing his subordinate at the same time had clearly shaken him. Mr. Chilembwe, tell me more about your plans with Zendaya McCreary, the detective began, turning on the tape recorder. I was really going to divorce my wife for her. I had already consulted a divorce lawyer. I planned to tell my wife about the divorce at the end of March. What exactly did you promise Zendaya? An apartment in the city center, which I already rented, a position as deputy director at the company with a corresponding salary, joint trips, which she loved so much. I spent about $50,000 on her in 8 months. Orleans sighed heavily. Detective, I understand how this looks from the outside, a middle-aged married man and a young employee, but I really fell in love with her. She was so lively, ambitious, beautiful. Did she tell you about any problems in her marriage? All the time. She said her husband was primitive and didn't understand her needs, that he was content with his simple life as a mechanic, but she wanted more. She complained that he wasn't romantic, didn't give her gifts, or take her to nice restaurants. What did she say about her feelings for you? That I had changed her life, that she felt like a real woman when she was with me. In the last few months, she talked constantly about how we would live together after my divorce. Okafor took notes, noting how skillfully Zendaya told each man exactly what he wanted to hear. Did you suspect she might be having an affair? Never. She swore I was the only man in her life besides her husband. She said she and her husband hadn't been intimate in a long time, that she was only staying with him out of pity. After questioning Orleans, the detective met with Amari Nkomo. The young man looked confused and angry at the same time. Mr. Nkomo, I want to understand the nature of your relationship with the victim. What exactly were you and Zendaya planning? We were going to get married. I got a job offer in Chicago with a good salary. Zendaya was ready to move with me and start a new life. When was the move supposed to take place? In May. I already put a deposit down on an apartment and bought an engagement ring. I was planning to propose to her next week. Amari took a small velvet box out of his pocket and placed it on the table. I spent all my savings on this ring, $3,000. I thought it would be the beginning of our happy life. What did Zendaya say about the marriage? That it was a mistake of youth. That they got married too young, and now she realizes she never really loved her husband. She promised to file for divorce right after New Year's. What about her feelings for you? She said it was the first time she'd ever been in love, that she'd discovered true passion with me. We spent every free evening together, making plans for the future. The detective noticed how differently Zendaya presented her relationship with her husband to each lover, adapting the story to their expectations. Mr. Nkomo, now that you know about Orline Chilembwe, how do you assess Zendaya's behavior? Amari's face contorted with pain and anger. She used me. She played with my feelings. I was ready to give up everything for her, and she just chose between us like we were items in a store. How do you feel now? Pain, humiliation, anger. But not at my husband. He's also a victim of her deception. Anger at her. How could she play with people so cruelly? That evening, Detective Okafor sat in his office analyzing all the evidence he had gathered. In front of him lay stacks of documents, the suspect's statements, the victim's phone records, witness statements, expert reports. The picture that emerged was surprisingly clear and tragic at the same time. Zendaya McCreary was a woman who skillfully manipulated men, using their feelings to achieve her own goals. She offered each of the three men exactly what he was looking for. To her husband, Dashon, she played the role of a faithful wife who sometimes stayed late at work but always came home. To her boss, Orleans, she presented herself as an unhappy woman in a marriage, dreaming of stability and respectability. To her colleague, Amari, she portrayed herself as a passionate woman, ready to do anything for love. All three men received different versions of the same story from her. Dashon thought they had a strong marriage with minor domestic problems. Orleans believed he was saving an unhappy woman from a boring life. Amari was convinced he had found his true love, ready to give up everything for him. The detective opened a folder with photos of Zendaya, a beautiful, smiling woman who knew how to charm and persuade. But behind this appearance lay cold calculation and the ability to lie without remorse. Her plan was almost perfect. Orleans provided financial security, expensive gifts, restaurants, an apartment, and the prospect of a promotion. Amari offered passion, romance, and the opportunity to start a new life in another city. And her husband provided stability and cover for her double life. Zendaya planned to choose one of her lovers depending on who offered the best conditions. Orleans promised divorce and marriage, which meant high social status and financial security. Amari offered a move and a new career, which promised freedom and opportunities for growth. But her plan fell apart due to a coincidence. Her husband decided to check her phone on the very night she was actively messaging both of her lovers. In a matter of minutes, 8 months of carefully constructed deception became an open book. The detective thought about the psychology of everyone involved in the tragedy. Dashon was a simple, honest man who believed in family values and had no idea his wife was capable of such a complex deception. His rage was understandable. Learning about his wife's double betrayal and her plans to choose between her lovers meant the complete collapse of his world. Orleans and Amari were also victims of manipulation, albeit less innocent ones. Each of them knew that Zendaya was married, but chose to believe that their relationships were special and justified. Okafor recalled Dashon's words that even after the murder, it hurt him to think about his wife's infidelity. 8 years of marriage, shared plans, dreams of children, all of it had been built on a lie on her part. The most cynical revelation was Zendaya's admission that she had never loved her husband and had married him only because she was pregnant, which she then hid along with the miscarriage. It turned out that their marriage had been based on deception from the very beginning. The detective finalized his report on the case. Dashon McCrory was charged with second-degree murder, a crime committed in the heat of passion. Given the circumstances of the case and his confession, he faced 10 to 15 years in prison. Orleans and Amari were not criminally liable, but their lives were also ruined. Orleans lost his reputation and his family. His wife filed for divorce after learning about the affair. Amari was left with a broken heart and debts for the ring and the apartment in Chicago. Closing the case file, Detective Okafor reflected on how lies and betrayal could destroy several lives at once. Zendaya was looking for a better life, but her methods led to a tragedy that destroyed everyone involved in the story. 4 people started this story with hopes and plans for the future. One died at the hands of her husband, One went to prison, and 2 were left with broken lives. The price of deception proved too high for everyone.